Well, good morning, church family. How are you? Good to see you. Thanks for being here. Man, that was a great song by Ben and the band. Aren't you grateful for God's kindness in your life? Yeah, me too. And did Ben was that a Cleveland Browns jersey that he had on? When was the last time you saw one of those things in public? It's been a long time, man, but that shows a lot of faith in that young man. He's got a lot of hope. He believes in the resurrection, apparently. So good to see y'all. My name's Troy, and I'm glad that you joined us this morning. You could be out doing a lot of things here in Steamboat, but glad you're in the house of God. A little bit of nip in the air the last few nights. Have you felt that? I think autumn is coming on, and so I only have a few more weeks of probably flip-flops and summer shirts, but it's going to be a gorgeous autumn. I'm believing that. But thank you for being here today, and although you're watching online as well. So we are in the middle of a series called Perfect Family, and if you missed any of the previous messages, I encourage you to go to YouTube or go to our website, catch up. You'll see part 1 and part 2. Really super helpful messages. I've gotten a lot of feedback on it. Hopefully it'll help you. Today we're going to jump into part 3, and I'm going to not mess around. I'm going to get right into this because what we're doing today is we're looking at a subject that we're all pretty familiar with. We're going to be talking about family conflict. Conflict in the family. Got real quiet in this little Methodist church here, but some of you probably had a nice little discussion on the way to church this morning. You're like, uh-oh, this is for us. No, I think all of us, one of the things that we all have in common when it comes to families is that we all have conflict. We all fuss, we all fight, we all argue from time to time. And it's funny, I thought about this. When you win an argument in your family, you don't really win. Right? You kind of lose. You don't win anything. If you win an argument in the boardroom or at work or in the courtroom, you get kudos. You know, they're like, high five, good job, you know, all that. But boy, if you win an argument in the living room or the bedroom, you've really lost, truly. You haven't won. And you may feel good because you out-argued the other person, but the conflict isn't over. And that's the thing. Conflict with family isn't like conflict in other places. Conflict with family is complicated. It's emotional, and it just goes on and on and on. It doesn't kind of ease up, and you don't solve it quickly. It just kind of drags out. And part of the thing that makes conflict so complicated is that we all process conflict differently. We all deal with conflict differently. We don't do it all the same way. For example, some of you, I would consider, or you might consider that you're a peacemaker. Are there any peacemakers in the house? You know what I'm talking about? You just want peace more than anything else, right? You don't want to win an argument. You don't want to argue. You just want peace. You want to avoid conflict at all costs. And so you're quick to go, okay, whatever you want is fine with me. Now, we know that you're lying, you're not telling the truth, but you just want to avoid the conflict, and we can't get you to engage. Other people are what I would maybe call litigators. You're on the opposite end of the extreme. You love to argue. You don't have to raise your hand. We know who you are. You're very good at it. In fact, you're never wrong. Most people don't argue with you anymore in your family anymore because you're never wrong. You know, you come out strong. You got all your facts and figures and your little charts, and you're pointing things out, and you go on, and everybody knows that you're right and they're wrong. And somehow, though, the issue never gets resolved, even though you're right. And so that's interesting. There are others that I would consider sulkers, that you just kind of sulk. I mean, that when there's conflict in the house, you just go way, way, way down. You just it really hits you hard, and you just kind of mope around the house because there's this cloud, and you just feel it. There are others that I would consider stuffers. You know what a stuffer is? They just kind of stuff it over and over. They don't say anything, but they just stuff it. And then what happens? What? It explodes. They come out all over you, right? And I mean, outwardly, the stuffers look like they're fine, but inwardly, they're kind of seething. The water's boiling and temperature's getting hot, and you're like, hey, is everything okay? Are you okay? And they're like, yeah. I'm okay. Are you sure that you're fine? Yeah, I'm fine. I mean, are you sure you're? Yeah, I'm fine. You're like, okay. Explodes on you. Speaking of which, there's another group. I call you the screamers. Again, you don't have to raise your hand. We know who you are. You love to shout. You love when you come from a family of screamers. It was just normal in your house to have those kind of discussions where it was really loud. Whenever there was a conflict in your family, just people let it all out. They'd shout it and it'd go on. Just people are angry and all that. And then 10 minutes after it's over, everybody's fine and it's all calm and everybody's cool with each other. You feel better, right? That's weird. In fact, I thought of this. It's funny. I have found in my own experience that screamers often end up marrying peacemakers. And I'm like, what's that about? You know, and how many would know, how many have that experience? No one, you guys are going to raise your hand if I ask anything. Thank you. Some of you are like that. And the first time you had an argument, bet you just kind of shouted, you went all out, and your partner was just like, oh, and it was over, and they're like, whoa, where did that come from, man? Demon, come out. You know, they're just like, wow, that was so scary and unsettling because they're not used to it. And so my point is that all of us have and deal with conflict differently. And the truth is that no one, let's just establish this, no one ever really wins an argument in the family. Everyone just kind of goes to their type, and the issue never really gets resolved in a good way. But the principle that we're going to look at today trumps all of that. It supersedes all of that. It is brilliant. This principle that I'm going to share with you today from Scripture is incredibly powerful. In fact, the principle that we talked about last week, if you weren't here, we talked about the principle of mutual submission. This idea of I don't have to win, you don't have to win. We can work and surrender and serve one another, and that there's something about that in the family that's helpful. And my hope is that you've been practicing that. That principle, this comes out of that. And these two principles that we're talking about this week and last week are two of the most important things that you can wrap your mind around to have a good family, to have a happy, peaceful home. I promise you. The reality is, and this is a true thing, the reality is that even though there are many different types of people and there's all kinds of different approaches to conflict, there's only really one source of conflict. Let me say that again. There are lots of ways of handling conflict, but there's only one source of where conflict comes from. Now, you may not agree, but hang with me. Today, we're going to look at this source. We're going to kind of coax it out of its little lair, its dark place, and we're going to study it. And I believe that if you and I would have the courage to acknowledge this principle and to own it, to make it ours, I believe this, that you and I can eliminate most, if not all, of the conflict that ever happens in our homes. That's a big promise. I believe that you and I could eliminate all of that conflict that's in our house. Wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't that be the ideal? That's what we talked about the last couple of weeks, is that you and I kind of live in the middle. There's this ideal that God has for us for the perfect family, and then there's the real, where we really live. This, I believe this, by if you use this technique, this will eliminate and bring down the tension in your house, and your family can move closer to the ideal closer than you ever imagined. Now, that's a big promise. Tell me if you agree with this at the end of this. This is good. Now, to help me explain this principle to you, I'm going to call on James. James, the brother of Jesus, the half-brother of Jesus. James wrote the book of James. Yeah, good. You're paying attention. 2,000 years ago, he wrote a book, real creative title there. In this letter, in this book that James wrote, he introduces you and I to one of the most profound relational insights. If you can understand this, I mean, this is huge. It's one of the most profound relational insights in all of Scripture. And he starts it by asking a question that maybe we ought to consider today. In James chapter 4, verse 1, he asks this question. He says, what causes fights and quarrels among y'all? What causes you to fight and quarrel? Now, I was tempted to ask you to answer this question out loud, but I was afraid that some of you would just simply point at the person sitting next to you and say, they do. It's them that causes all the fights. And then what would happen is there'd be these fights and arguments out there, and we'd all be here all morning long because everybody would be blaming everyone else for the conflict that's in our homes. But one of the reasons that you and I struggle to resolve conflict in our home is because we don't know the real reason why we fight, right? in the first place. We don't know the real reason. Now, some of you are like, you're pushing back. You're like, yes, I do know the real reason we fight. It's him. He's so stubborn. He doesn't listen. And he just goes on. He's so stubborn. Or it's her. It's her. She just spends way too much money. She's spending so much money. Or it's them. It's my kids. They just go around and they make a mess of everything. And they don't pick up after themselves. Or it's my parents. My parents are just always butting in to my life. We would think it's them. But here's the thing. Whenever there's conflict, our impulse is to point fingers and to blame the others. But let me ask you a question. How many of you ever have been in a family conflict and it got solved by blaming someone? It never did. No way. No one ever said, oh, thank you, honey, for blaming me. Now that we know what the problem is, we can maybe solve the problem. That just doesn't work. No one has ever said that. Blaming never accomplishes anything. It never accomplishes anything. In fact, I have been trying a new tactic in my own house when it comes to this. I have decided to take the blame for everything. It's my fault. I've been practicing this to see if it works. If something gets broken in my house, or something stops working, or if there's a problem with money, or if there's a problem with the kids, I just go, hey, this is my fault. Someone asks, why is this happening? I go, it's me. It's my fault. And they're like, well, how is it your fault? And I go, well, if you just give me a minute, I'll figure out and tell you why. Let me think about it. And so I'll think and I'll scratch my head. And if I don't come up with something specific, this is what I say. It's my fault. And here's why. If I just hadn't have asked your mother out on a date that one time. If I hadn't asked her out on a date, we would have never got married. And we never got married, we would have never had kids. And if we never had kids, we would not be having this problem right here. It's my fault. It's all my fault. And I think that's cute. The rest of my family's not enjoying that too much. It's not going over too well. But that does point out how pointless it is to point fingers, to be blaming and thinking about whose fault this is. That it's just pointless, and it doesn't help, and it makes things worse. In fact, some of you have already learned this truth in your own life. You've stumbled over this truth, but you and I have forgotten, and it's this. Think about this. As long as you blame others for your unhappiness, you will always be unhappy. If you can figure this out, this is true. As long as you're not happy because of what other people are doing or how other people are behaving or they're not doing what you want, as long as you blame others for your unhappiness, you will always be unhappy. Every time you blame someone for something, it's his fault or it's her fault. Here's what you're doing. Think about this. You are literally handing over your happiness to them. You're taking your happiness and you're handing it to the person that you're in conflict with. And you're saying, hey, you know what? I'm just so angry at what you're doing. You're driving me crazy here. And so here, I want to give you my happiness. I want you to hold on to it, and you hold on to it for a while, and when you're done doing what you're doing, then you can give me my happiness back, because I can't be happy until you stop doing what you're doing. I can't be happy until you give my happiness back to me. And that's just dumb. If I was to ask you, how many of you would like to give control over your happiness to someone that you're in conflict with, none of you would raise your hands. No one would do that. But so many of us fall into this trap of thinking, gosh, until he stops doing this, until she admits that she did this, I can't be happy. Until things change in my house, I can't be happy. Every time I blame, I give away my happiness. And I don't want to do that, and I know that you don't want to do it either. And so let's look at what James says here. And this is brilliant, and this is hard, and I need you to pay attention and flow with me. Hang with me on this. And here's the thing. I'm going to warn you right up front. What James says here, your initial reaction is to push back. You're like, I disagree with that. I don't agree with that. But I want to challenge you to hang with me for a few minutes so that you can maybe see the wisdom of what James is offering us. He says this: what causes fights and quarrels among you? And again, you and I hear this and we think, there can't be just one answer to that question. I mean, there's got to be as many answers as there are people in this room to that question, because what causes fights is other people, the jerks that live with me. That's what's causing all of this. And you might think that. You might think that the source of all the fights and all the quarrels and all the conflict in your life is others. But James says something else. He says, no, there's only one source. And here's what he says. He says, don't they come from your desires that battle within you? In other words, you are thinking that it's other people, but the true source of all of that chaos is you. It comes from inside of you. Now, before you dismiss that, listen, you need to hear him out. He says this in verse 2. He says this. He makes a great statement. He says, you desire, but you do not have. In other words, every time there's a conflict, you have a desire. You're desiring something. You want something. Every time you've had a conflict with somebody about anything, there is something that you want. There's something you want. Now, you might say, it's not something I want. It's something I deserve. I deserve better than this. Or it's something that I was promised. You know, she promised me this. It's something that we agreed to, right? We took a vow, right? She made a promise, right? She said that she would do this, and she hasn't done it. And we'll get to what they said or what they did in just a minute. Hold on. My point here is that wherever there's been a conflict, whenever there's been a conflict between you and someone else, there is something that you want that you're not getting, right? Maybe it's respect. I deserve a little respect here. Or maybe it's a courtesy. I deserve, you're just so rude. I deserve better than that. Or maybe it's help. I just need some help. Or maybe it's the fulfillment of a promise or an agreement, right? But there's something that they're doing that they're not doing that you want them to do. James continues. He says this is brilliant. He says, you desire, but you do not have, so you kill. Wow, that escalated pretty quick. Where did that come from? That's crazy. You kill? Because you're not getting what? Well, listen, you got to remember here, James is talking to church people. He's not talking to people who are in prison or people who are sitting around on death row. He's talking to church people, so he's clearly using hyperbole here to make a point. But when you and I think about what happens in a family conflict, when we have an argument, that's actually a good description of kind of what's happening, right? James is saying, listen to me, he's saying there are things that you and I want so badly that we're willing to hurt the people that we love the most to get them. And we'll do it, even if that means killing this relationship or killing our friendship. Yeah. I mean, in fact, here's the truth. You think about it. You and I have seen parents who have killed their relationship with their kids simply because the kids wouldn't do what the parents wanted them to do, right? In fact, some of you may have left home as soon as you turned 18, or maybe even earlier. You got out of there, right? Why? Because you couldn't stand to be around your parents anymore because of all the nagging and fighting and arguing. And so you just got out of there. And if I was to interview your parents now, today, and ask them what was the reason they left, they would say, if they were being honest, they would say, I wanted them to be something, or I wanted them to do something, and they wouldn't do it. And they left, and our relationship died. It was killed. And you would probably say the same thing. You would say, they wanted me to stop doing something, and I wouldn't do it. And so I left. And the relationship came to an end. It died. You and I have seen this play out in other families. We've seen husbands who power up, huff and puff, and they destroy their wife's self-esteem because she won't give them what they want, what he wants. We've seen wives criticize their husbands to the point that he doesn't have any confidence in himself anymore simply because she wants something more. She feels she deserves something more. We've seen mom and dads set such high expectations for their kids that their kids' hearts are just overwhelmed and crushed by those expectations. Why? Because they want something from them so that they can feel proud or they can feel more fulfilled as a parent, that they did their job. And they cloak it by saying things like, well, I just want the best for you. I just want you to have the best. I just want you to reach your potential. But they're often lying to themselves because it's not really about their kids. It's not really about them. The whole time that they're arguing and nagging and texting their kid and leaving little Post-it notes all over the house reminding them what they want, the parents are telling them, this is about them. It's them. And James says, no, it's not. It's about you. You want something and you're not getting it. And you'll do whatever you can to get it, even if that means killing and ending this relationship. This is crazy. Then James says something fascinating. In verse 2, he says, you covet, but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight. Why do we fight? Because you want something that you can't get. And the word that he used here is covet. That's an Old Testament word. You and I rarely, if ever, use that word in normal conversation. And so let me give you a definition of what covet is. It's one of the 10 Commandments. Coveting is to be overly focused on what you want. To be intensely focused only on what you want. And if you think about that, isn't that a great description of what happens when you get into an argument with somebody, right? You are becoming intensely and overly focused on getting what you want from this debate. What do you want? Well, I want to win. I don't care what we're talking about. I just want to win the debate. Or I want you to apologize to me. Or I just want to be heard. Or I want you to give me what you owe me. And we become very intensely focused about what we want when we get in a debate. Now, I want to just pause here for a second because this is a key point that I want to draw out of this that will help you and I. I tell you, this is brilliant. Think about this. Don't miss this. What would happen if just before things start to go off the rails with that family member what would happen if just before things, really escalate, if one of you just paused and took a deep breath and asked yourself this question? Wait a second here. Is part of the frustration that I'm feeling here, I'm very angry right now, I'm very frustrated. Is part of the frustration I'm feeling right now because I'm not getting what I want? Is that what's happening here? How would that thought affect the discussion, the tone of it? If you thought for a second, this is about me. I thought it was all about you, but what if some of this is about me? I would suggest to you that me, right before this thing escalates, it's about to go off and you sense it, all of a sudden you stop and you go, ho, 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 hey, listen to me. You listen to me. Do you know what part of the problem is here? I'm not getting what I want. Your person standing in front of you, what? Yeah. And your wife, she hears this and she's like, hey, let me tell you something, Buster. You know what part of the problem is here? I'm not getting what I want either. What would that do? What would happen? I'm telling you, it would change the whole atmosphere that's happening. It would change the temperature. It would lower the temperature in the room, and it would change the discussion. It would change the trajectory of where this is headed. If both of you stopped and went, wait a second, some of this is about me. It's kind of like what we talked about last week when we talked about mutual submission. Remember last week we practiced, I encourage you to ask a question on a daily basis with your family, to ask them one question on a daily basis just to kind of decrease the tension in the air, to bring more commitment and connection to people by asking what question. What was the question I asked you to ask? That's right, you listen. What can I do to help? To put it on your phone and every day go to someone in your family and say, hey, out of nowhere, is there anything I can do to help? That would just bring so much beauty and wonder and peace into your home. And it's just like that. In the same way, we should practice this statement. We should practice saying this. Imagine you're about to get into a knockdown, drag-out fight, right? You're in the middle of it, and you are this close to losing all control, and suddenly you remember what James wrote here. And so you say, hey, wait a minute. Do you know what part of the problem is here? I'm not getting what I want. I just realized that. In fact, would you say that with me? Let's practice this together. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Do you know what part of the problem is? I'm not getting what I want. Now, that sounded really light. You guys didn't seem like you really believed it. That was like a 2, and I was hoping for a 6, all right? So I want to ask you to say it again this time, but this time I want you to say it with a little attitude, and I want you to get your finger out. Point your finger. Ready? Ready? Are we doing it? 1, 2, 3. Do you know what part of the problem is? I'm not getting what I want. Can you imagine what would happen if that became a habit of yours? If that became normal in your home? So many arguments would just kind of fizzle out after that. Because asking that kind of helps. You may think, oh, this isn't good, but it helps. When people realize, wait a second here, part of the frustration I'm feeling here is you, but part of it is me. There's something inside of me. And I probably need to deal with me before I talk to you. I probably need to settle what it is that I want here. Now, this is hard. None of you want to do this. In fact, the truth is most of you will not practice this. You won't do it, and here's why. Because getting introspective in the middle of an argument is a bad move tactically. Suddenly looking at yourself in the mirror and going, oh, maybe I'm not all that. Maybe I'm partly to... That's just the worst thing you can do in the middle of a debate. I was a debater in high school and in college. You would never go, wait a second, I didn't think of that. No, you would never do that because that's a bad move tactically. That's how you'll lose. In fact, years ago, this is true, when I didn't know better, I used to do marriage counseling. I found out quickly I'm not a marriage counselor. I might be a marriage cheerleader. I can help you. But back then, I thought, I got this marriage thing down. I can help you with your marriage. My wife's listening to this. She's like, ha, 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 very funny. But I've discovered over time that counseling is very hard and you need some training and skills. I didn't have any of those things. But I remember one time sitting there with a couple, and I was listening to them basically play the blame game. They were just like, on and on and on about what the other person did. Well, she did this. Well, yeah, but you did this. But you said this, and then I did this, and we did this, and on and on and on. And I was listening to that, and I thought, this is going nowhere quickly. And so I had a thought. I thought, you know what? And so on a little notepad, I drew a pie chart, just kind of like this. I put a little round circle, and I asked each one of them, I want you, and I handed them the notepad. I said, I want you to draw a slice of that pie that represents how much you feel this is your problem, that you've contributed to this situation here. Just want you to, I realize that you feel like your spouse is mostly to blame. There's no doubt that more than 50% is their fault. But I just want you to tell me how much you think that this issue is your fault. Like, for example, is it 30%? 30%? Just kind of mark out a third of that. Or they looked at me, I'm like, okay, maybe 20%? Just do 20%, 20%. And they looked at me, I'm like, okay, let's start low. How about 2%? Is 2% of your thing? And here's the interesting thing. Neither of them marked a piece of the pie out. Neither of them would do it. They kind of hemmed and they hawed on it, and they brought up all kinds of excuses, and they went down some rabbit trails, but neither of them was willing to mark off a slice. And do you know why? Because they know the rule. If you own a slice, then you have to be nice. If you admit that you're a part of the problem, then that's going to cause this thing to get a little bit easier. As soon as you admit that you're a part of the problem, even just a little bit, something changes inside of you and outside of you. Number one, you shift from being on the offense, on the attack, right? And instantly, when you realize you're a part of it, your energy comes down a little bit and you don't attack so much. Or you are on the defense and you don't feel like you have to be on the defense when the other person admits it, or when you admit it. You don't have to jab and counterpunch anymore, and the tension and the fear of the attack decreases. Why? because you are losing leverage. You are giving up some of your power and ability to get what you want. And James says, that's my point. That's my point. The reason that you fight and you argue is that you're worried that you won't get what you want. And so you're willing to kill this relationship to get it. And that's a bad trade. That is a bad trade. There's a better way to get what you want. In fact, according to James, he says that there's a better way to get what you want. If you want something, you want it. Let me share with this. And he would say, instead of going on the offense, or instead of going on the defense, you need to go to your knees. You need to go to your knees. Instead of fighting and arguing with your family, which everyone knows and everybody admitted never leads to a resolution, much less gets you what you really want, right? James says, have you considered praying about this instead? He says that in verse 2. He says, you have not because you do not ask God. You want something and you're asking the wrong person. You need to go to God. Now, I'm telling you, this is so powerful. And if you're not a believer here, listen, so far, everything that I've told you, you can take this home and you can try it at home and it will work for you. You don't have to believe in God. You don't have to believe in Jesus. This thing will work no matter what. In fact, you can totally ditch the Bible and act like you had never heard this in church. Just ditch the whole scripture thing. Just in the middle of it, just pause and say, hey, wait a second. I've been thinking. Part of the problem here is that I'm not getting what I want. That's part of the problem. And I have realized that getting what I want is not more important than loving you or being in a relationship with you or losing the peace in our home. And just take credit for it. This is my idea. I've just thought of this. And I'm telling you, if you say that within no time, your home will be a much happier and peaceful place. This will work for you, whether you believe or not. But if you are a Jesus follower, this next part is super cool. It's an ace in the hole for us. It's a wild card that we can play that is a game changer that often we leave unplayed. James says that the reason you don't have what you want is because you're not asking God. In other words, before you go stomping down the hallway to give him a piece of your mind about what he did and what he's not giving you, before you get out your laptop and start typing away that little email and going to send it off to them, before you get out your little texture and you're like, well, what about you? Before you get in their face, James would say, have you taken this to God yet? Have you asked him to help you with this yet? And equally, have you asked God to help you get to the root of what you really want? Have you asked him to help you to get what you want? I mean, do you even know what you really want? What is it that you want here? Do you just want to win? Is that all? Or do you just want to tell them off? Or do you want to find a way to maybe resolve this and have a happy marriage? Can't have both. Do you want to force your kids to obey you when you tell them what to do? Or do you want to help your kids see that they're a part of the family and that they can contribute to making this a happy home? Do you want a wife who just complies with every one of your demands, sir? Or do you want a partner who is working with you to create something beautiful, something that will last? Do you want your parents just to butt out and leave you alone and go away? Or don't you want them to be kind of a positive, helpful influence into you, your life, and into your kids and their grandkids' life? What do you want? Have you taken the time to ask God what you really want? Or are you just simply trying to squeeze out of your family members things that they're incapable of giving you? Right? Like a toothpaste. You just squeeze every bit of it. You're trying to get it out of them. And they don't have it in them. James would say, have you poured out your heart to your heavenly Father with the same emotion that you've poured out your frustration on everyone that you're living with. Have you tried that? See, here's the truth that you and I often forget, and that is that God cares. He cares, and He wants to help us. He cares about you. He cares about your marriage. He cares about your finances. He cares about your kids. He cares about your loneliness. He cares about your dating status, all of that. All of those things are important to God, and He has promised to help you with those things if you bring them to Him in prayer. And here's what happens often when we pray. Oftentimes when we ask God for something, He gives it to us. I have found that God's got about a 60%, I got a 60% success rate when I pray to God about wanting something or asking for something. About 60%. He doesn't give it all the time because sometimes He says no. I don't like that, but I'm old enough now to see that sometimes God's no's are the best thing in the world for me. Amen? Thank God for the no's that He gave, the prayers that I had, because sometimes God knows what's best for me. And sometimes it's not even about me. God says no to me because He's doing something for you way over here. And when I get to heaven, I'll get to see, and I'll go, well, gosh, that was an easy trade. I'm glad that that happened for you. I'm glad that you got that. So oftentimes God gives me what I want when I pray to Him. Sometimes He says no because He knows what's best. But at very least, by taking my desires to Him first, God can help me at least discover what it is that I really want, that I'm really looking for, what I really want. And by knowing what I really want and what's most important, that will take the edge off of those conversations that I'm having with everyone in my home. That'll take some of the frustration out of me because now I know what it is that I'm looking for. And so, you and I basically have two choices. We can try to squeeze out of our families something that they can't ultimately give us, aka our happiness. That's our responsibility, not theirs. We can try to do that. We can try to get them to give our happiness, or we can go to God, who is our true source of help and peace and joy. James would say that the choice is simple. He would say, what causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? You desire, but you do not have, and so you are willing to kill the very things that you love the most, the things that are most important to you. You covet, you intensely want what you cannot get what you want, and so that's when you start to fight and quarrel and argue. But the real reason that you don't have what you want is because you don't ask God. Brilliant. Brilliant. I hope this helps you. Let me pray for you and we'll get out of here. Heavenly Father, I just ask that this morning you would help each one of us help us to see the source of conflict in our family. Who is the source of all the conflict? I've been thinking it's him or it's her, but I'm wondering now, is it me? Is it that I'm wanting something that I can't have, and so I'm trying to make it happen? God, I pray you would show me who that is. And maybe I pray that you would help me think about who. Who is it in my family that I feel like is getting in the way of my happiness? Who in my family is feeling pressure from me to make me happy, to stop doing this, or to start doing this, or to start working harder, or to be more motivated, whatever it is? Who is that person? Who is feeling that pressure from me to make me happy? Is it my son? Is it my daughter? Is it my wife, my husband? Is it my mom or dad? Whoever it is, God, would you help them? Would you help them with their issue? But God, I ask that you would first help me. Help me to see my relationship with them and how valuable it is, and help me to see how I've been communicating with them and how pointless that's been. Help me to stop trying to squeeze something out of them that they may not even have to give me. In fact, I pray, God, that you would help us see them as you see them. That you would see the potential that they have inside of them, not just the failures, not where they're just falling short now, the imperfections, that we would see the potential, and that we would see how you see them, and that we would love them and treat them just as you treat them, with patience, with kindness, with sacrificial love. And that we would think about what it is